Years ago, when I was 8, my family lived in this big, weird house on the edge of a small town. At the time, the local school district was in the middle of a massive restructuring. Even though my brother and I were only a couple of grades apart, we ended up going to different schools and taking different buses. This meant that every morning, I was the last one to leave the house, and every afternoon, I was the first one to get home. It became my job to make sure all the lights were off and the front door was locked before I left. One morning, as I was doing my usual routine, I noticed the basement door was open and the light was on. Before heading out, I turned off the light, closed the door, and didn't think much of it. But that afternoon when I got home, the basement light was back on and the door was wide open again. I just figured I must have forgotten to actually take care of it earlier. So I walked over, planning to shut it all down for real this time. But when I got to the top of the stairs and looked down, I froze. There, standing near the bottom of the basement steps, was a large, shadowy male figure. I panicked, slammed the door shut, shoved a bunch of boxes in front of it, and ran to my bedroom, where I hid in my closet, heart pounding in my ears. I didn't tell anyone. For months, I kept it to myself, because I was absolutely convinced that what I had seen was a ghost. And I knew no one would believe me. Fast forward a year. My mom and her boyfriend started noticing that small amounts of money had been disappearing. Nothing huge, $40 here, $20 there, but over time, it added up to nearly $900. One night, we all walked through the house with flashlights, trying to figure out how someone could have possibly gotten inside. That's when we found it. There was a small hole in the outside wall of the house, just big enough for a person to squeeze through. It led into a narrow crawl space, and from there straight into the basement. Some creep had been shimmying into our home through that tiny opening and sneaking up from the basement. And realizing that I had been alone in the house with him, that I had looked him in the eye thinking he was something supernatural, was the most terrifying moment of my life. One night I was out at a bar in New Rochelle, NY, visiting a friend. We stepped outside for a cigarette, and a car came flying past us, blowing through a red light and speeding up a curved hill. We watched as it crossed over the double yellow line and slammed head-on into another car coming from the opposite direction. Both cars lifted off the ground, then slammed back down. The one that had been driving correctly immediately burst into flames. I ran inside, grabbed the fire extinguisher, and shouted to the bartender to call 911. There had been a crash. My friend, a few patrons, and I ran toward the scene. Now, I used to think this was just a movie trope, but I swear, I was drunk before it happened. And in an instant, I was completely sober. I tried using the extinguisher, it did nothing. The fire was too intense, the heat, the fumes, unbearable. We couldn't get close enough. And the worst part, the part that still haunts me, is that the woman in the burning car was screaming as she died. My God, it was the worst sound I've ever heard. The fire department arrived and put out the flames. The police took us back to the bar to give statements. The next day, I read about it in the news. The woman in the car, the one who wasn't speeding, was a young woman on her way home from work. She was just 1 block away from her house. I think she had just gotten married, or maybe she was a new mother. The bastard who hit her? Some rich, drunk piece of shit. He lost a leg, but was otherwise fine. I don't know if he did time. I left town a day or two later. Sometimes it's just 1 second. One turn of the wheel, and someone's life ends in fire, while another life goes on, carrying the weight of what it witnessed. It wasn't my road, but I saw where it led, and it left a mark. December 13th, 2013, Friday, a day that superstitious people treat with caution. But for 17-year-old Jaden Parkinson, it would become the last day of her life. She lived in a quiet town in Oxfordshire, England. Just an ordinary girl, but her relationship with her ex-boyfriend, 22-year-old Ben Blakely, had been anything but normal. He was controlling, angry, violent. She had left him once already. Then she found out she was pregnant. She reached out to tell him, and despite everything, she agreed to meet. Maybe she thought he'd changed. Maybe she hoped they could make peace for the child. They met in a field that day, cold and gray skies overhead. Jaden likely never even realized what was happening. Ben strangled her where she stood. Then he took her body and hid it in his uncle's grave. Yes, he buried her in an actual cemetery, but it didn't end there. He sent messages from her phone pretending she was alive. "I just need some space," he wrote to her family. "I'm okay." All lies. Her mother pleaded with the police. Volunteers searched, and days later they found her. At trial, Blakely was sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum of 20 years before parole could even be considered. The most haunting part? It happened on Friday the 13th, but it wasn't a curse. It wasn't bad luck. It was a choice, made by someone she trusted. It was 1975, a quiet town in Oregon, USA. 13-year-old Colleen Arwood went missing. She had gone out for a walk and never returned. Her mother panicked and called the police. Search parties formed, scouring the parks, the woods, the neighborhood. Days passed, and there was no trace. For 3 days, the town didn't sleep. People whispered, neighbors wondered, but no one expected that all this time. She had never left the house. Colleen was found in her own bedroom, dead. Her body was hidden inside a toy chest. She had been strangled, carefully placed, quietly closed. The most horrifying part, the killer wasn't a stranger, not some monster lurking in the shadows. It was her stepfather. He confessed after interrogation. At first he lied. Then he broke, and he told the truth. He killed her, then let her mother cry, call out for her, search the streets, while Colleen lay just meters away in the same room. This wasn't a ghost story. This wasn't about curses. This was about someone who was trusted, a monster who didn't hide in the dark, but lived inside the home. Because sometimes horror isn't out there. It's the thing that's far too close. When I was a baby, my dad played on a local softball team. It was the usual small town thing. A bunch of guys, some beers, a few laughs, and pizza with the families afterward. My parents were especially close with two of the other couples on the team. They all had young kids, just like me. That night after a game, those two couples decided to head over to one of their houses to hang out and have more drinks. They left all the kids at that house, with a babysitter they were sharing. They invited my parents too, and normally they would have gone, no question. But for some reason, I wouldn't stop crying. I was fussy, inconsolable. So my mom said no. She just wanted to get me home and put me to bed. And that decision, that tiny change in plans, saved our lives. Because when the other parents came home, they walked straight into a nightmare. Two men had broken into the house. They tied up the kids, they tied up the babysitter, and her boyfriend, who happened to be visiting. And they waited, in the dark. When the parents walked in, they were taken hostage too. The men forced the dads to drive, one to a grocery store where he was the manager, the other to the bank. They cleaned out accounts, opened safes, and then They brought everyone back to the house and they killed them. All of them. The parents, the babysitter, her boyfriend, and the children. My dad went to the trials. He said it was the first time in his life he ever felt himself supporting the death penalty. We were supposed to be there that night, but my crying saved our lives. It's hard to explain what that feels like, to grow up knowing you were almost a name in a headline.